Minimal supplies, wow results. Hi everyone, I'm Yana Smakula. Welcome back for another Yippee for Yana episode. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a beautiful wow card using just a handful of supplies you probably already have in your stash. I'm going to use the brand new Wildflower Cuttings stamp set. If you don't have this particular stamp set, you probably already have something similar in your stash, something like this beautiful branch. So check your stash for a similar stamp set, or if you want to follow along, go ahead and purchase this stamp set from the Simon Says Stamp store. By the way, all supplies I'm using for this card are listed and linked in the video description below for your convenience. I'm also going to use supplies to do white heat embossing on colored cardstock. I am using some colored cardstock and beautiful gems from Simon Says Stamp. And this particular color is the Mandarin Positively Dazzling Gems from Simon. So let's go ahead and get started. I had a card idea in mind, and I had a design in mind, and I thought about ways I could implement this design using limited number of supplies and without applying too much effort. I decided I needed to heat emboss the beautiful wildflower image on colored cardstock. I wanted to heat emboss it in white embossing powder and place it on the same color background for a tone-on-tone look. So here I'm using Simon Says Stamp Honey cardstock. I love this color. This is a newer cardstock color, and I absolutely love how warm and vibrant and saturated this color is. It has become a favorite of mine in my craft room, and if you follow my videos, you probably have already seen me use this colored cardstock quite a bit. I used my Mini Misty stamping tool. I treated my paper, my colored cardstock, using an anti-static powder tool. I then inked up my wildflower image using clear embossing ink from Simon Says Stamp, and I covered the top of the image using detail white embossing powder. I'm now using my heat tool and slowly melting the powder in place. So I'm applying heat all over the image and melting the powder. You can also do this technique depending on the color of cardstock you want to use, using other colors of embossing powder. You can find a beautiful example in the Simon Says Stamp store where a gold embossing powder was used. You can also use clear embossing powder, silver embossing powder. You have many, many options, and I'm sure you already have some color of embossing powder in your stash, so this should not be hard to replicate. I was planning to make an A2 card, so a card that measures 4¼ by 5½ inches, and I figured I would need about 4 branches for my background. I'm going to use the same image, and I'm going to heat emboss it multiple times to create a background, to fill an entire background, to have a pattern on my card. Now, sometimes you can use multiple images to create a pattern, and I love using that technique. I often do that, but for this particular card, I wanted to use just one image. You can also skip using coordinating dies. I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but you will see me use coordinating dies in a bit and cut all of these out. If you want, you can skip using coordinating dies and you can simply stamp these images, these wildflowers, directly onto the background and avoid using the coordinating dies and skip doing the die cutting. I decided to do die cutting because whenever I do heat embossing, regardless of what cardstock I use, my cardstock warps just a little bit. It doesn't matter what I do. Maybe I don't do heat embossing the right way, but regardless, every time I do heat embossing, there's just a slight amount of warping. And when there's warping, I really don't like to have that warping on a card background. So I knew I will have some warping happen on my images, so I decided to use coordinating dies and cut the images out. Just now you saw me use a cloth, and I used that cloth to wipe any residual anti-static powder from my cardstock. Next, I'm using the coordinating dies. I love that the dies cut very detailed images out, and I'm using Best of Our Craft tape from Spellbinders to tape the die in place before I send it through my die cutting machine to cut this image out. I have my Spellbinders Platinum 6 die cutting machine off to the side, and I went ahead and I cut all 4 branches out for my card. Now, I knew that I would be adding dimension. I'm making a very simple card, but the simpler the card, the more interest you want to add to that card by using various techniques. And one of the techniques I like to use is dimension. So I knew I would be foam mounting, I would be popping these branches on my card background. Now, the branches are rather delicate, and whenever I work with a delicate piece, with a delicate die cut like this, I like to back it up with another piece of cardstock just to make it a bit sturdier. Simon Says Stamp cardstock is quite sturdy, it is quite thick cardstock, but when you manipulate it, when you heat emboss on it, when you cut it out, and when you have a detailed image like this, you want to make sure to add some sort of support to that image so that there's minimal sagging on the finished card. Of course, if you want to cut the image out, that is, and pop it up on your card. So I cut additional blank pieces from colored cardstock. I used glue and I adhered the blank piece from the back of my heat embossed piece, and then I added foam adhesive squares from the back of each of those branches. I used my Mini Misty stamping tool, and I stamped a beautiful message onto this card. So this card ended up being a sympathy card, I think, because this message, thinking of you today and always, it kind of speaks sympathy to me. It might not be just the sympathy card, but regardless, it's a beautiful and thoughtful message. Of course, you can use any type of message you want, and there are many sentiments included in this stamp set. There's one that says, "Thank you for everything, just for you. Our friendship means the world to me. I hope you're feeling better." So you have a good selection of options. I particularly wanted to use the one that reads, "Thinking of you today and always." I used black ink. I used the VersaFine Onyx Black, and I stamped my sentiment in the bottom right corner. I already have a card panel. So this panel is made from the same honey cardstock. It was cut to 4¼ by 5½ inches, adhered onto a card base created from the same cardstock. I could have skipped using the panel, and I could have stamped the sentiment directly onto my card base, but I often like to add additional panels whenever I'm creating my cards. This way, my cards just feel a little bit thicker, a little bit more dimensional, a little bit more hefty in my hand. So that's why I stamp the sentiment onto a panel, and then I adhere that panel onto a card base. I have already added foam adhesive squares. These are small foam adhesive squares, and these are the regular thickness foam adhesive squares from the back of my branches, and I'm now removing the backer pieces from the foam squares and foam mounting the branches onto my card, and I'm trying to position the branches so that they fill the entire background. Next, I'm going to use scissors and carefully trim all of those pieces that go outside the edge of my card off. Now, I'm not throwing the pieces away. I'm not discarding them. Instead, I'm trying to reuse them, and I'm trying to fill the gaps that I have on my background using those pieces. I'm not going to use every single piece, of course, but many pieces are going to be used because I do have quite a lot of gaps there. You can keep the gaps if you want. You don't necessarily have to cover every gap. It's completely up to you how you want to build this background and how full you want the background to be. I just wanted to add a couple more pieces onto the background so I didn't have those larger gaps. I manipulated some of the die cuts a little bit. I trimmed little pieces wherever I needed, and I just added them onto the background, again, using foam adhesive squares. It's a simple design. It's a very simple card. I'm basically using just one product in, for the most part, just one color. But because they have different textures, it looks interesting. Once everything was adhered, I used a jelly roll pen, a white pen, and I added dots onto my background. This is one of my favorite techniques, one of my favorite tricks to do whenever I'm creating a card like this. I just use a white pen and I add dots next to the die cuts, next to my images to add additional texture to the background, to add additional interest to the background. I have the dots. I have 1 dot and 3 dots, 2 dots. I have random number of dots next to those branches. Finally, I positioned a bunch of gems from this gem pack that I mentioned earlier. So again, this is the Mandarin Positively Dazzling Gems from Simon Says Stamp. I picked the smallest gem from the pack, and I have, for the most part, just a single gem overlapping the branch. In some cases, I have a grouping of 3 gems, and the gems mimic little red flowers on my branches. You can go with whatever color you want. I wanted to have a little bit of contrast, and I really like how yellow and red go well together. I love that look. So here I went with a yellow background with the yellow branches and the red berries or flowers. You can also reverse this design and use red cardstock for the background and for the branches. Again, use that same white heat embossing powder, but then add yellow flowers or yellow berries on top. So use yellow gems as a finishing touch. I bet that would also look really nice, and the red color would be very, very striking. So this is a look at the card I have for you today, created with a limited number of supplies. I just used one stamp set, a set of coordinating dies, colored cardstock, embossing powder, and black ink. And that, well, of course, gems. And we all have gems in our stash. So that's a look at the card that I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you feel inspired to create. I encourage you to grab your Wildflower Cuttings stamp set and create a card like this. Or look through your stash, shop your stash. Maybe you have a similar stamp set in your stash and you can create a similar type card using whatever you have on hand. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.